I'm recording. So I would like to say hello, good morning to everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Fiona Wurler, and I'm an integrative Sandtray therapist and trainer. And I'm down here in Australia, and my very special guest today is Marshall Lyles from Austin, Texas. Hello, Marshall. How are you today?
I'm good, Fiona. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. I'm good. It's always interesting, isn't it, when we get together and we have to figure out times and days and I don't, well, yeah, today where you are is Valentine's Day, and so I jokingly said to you, do you really want to have a date with me on Valentine's Day? I'm sure Heather won't be pleased.
Heather's still got like 3 hours left in her workday, so we're in the clear.
We've got 3 hours. Oh dear. So I guess let's start with not who you are. We know who you are. We know you're Marshall Lyles, but tell us a little bit about yourself. But I'm really curious to know where and why you got to where you have got to, because last time we spoke, you were saying to me that you're seeing less and less clients one-on-one, doing more training, doing more creative stuff. So weave that story through for us. Sure. As we know that poet in you only can.
I originally wasn't going to be a therapist. That was not my original choice in a profession. I was going to be a writer. I studied journalism and was working for a newspaper. And so writing and photography was really my plan, was the goal. And even in the world of journalism, I was more drawn to the narrative, the things that are a little more feature writing and writing stories. But it was just kind of a series of conversations with people who knew me well and were mentoring me that helped me see that perhaps I was trying to do mental health work through writing. And one of my mentors arranged for me to have a conversation with a marriage and family therapy program director. And everything just started moving so quickly after that in hindsight, it doesn't feel like I made the choices, that it just kept happening, and I just kept going through the next door without thinking too much about it. And
that's a bit like divine intervention, doesn't it?
It was, yeah, it was a really strange 6 months. It happened really quickly. But I started at this program, and I had no idea that there were different avenues for how to become a therapist. I didn't know that some people were learning it through social work and others through psychology. I went marriage and family therapy, and in my program, there were expressive arts training. There was play, there was sand, those sorts of things. And so from the beginning, that was how I was getting to work, was through experiential and expressive means, and working with all age peoples and systems. And so it was creative enough that I just kept feeling inspired and the fun of it, and fell in love really rather quickly. It was also there that I got introduced to attachment theory, and found that it helped the world make sense to me finally. And the things I'd been trying to write about, I realized I was really trying to come to understand attachment, but no one had really sat me down and said, this is what you're trying to do. And so it became a season of me just discovering, not just my gifts or what I had to offer, but how I could find belonging in the world. And so that the career hooked me from the beginning. And sand was, I know this is not everyone's story, but sand was in it from the beginning. I was exposed to Sandtray right in grad school.
Wow, I'm jealous. I've just written down it helped me to make sense. It helped the world to make sense to me. It helped me to make sense of the world. I'm a bit dyslexic. I love that with attachment. Do you feel as though that doesn't ever stop, that understanding attachment in all its various ways and means continues to help you to make sense of not just your world, but everyone's world?
Oh, yeah. You know, one of the gifts of our profession is, even though I know when we sit down to be with a client or a supervisee or in a training class, that we're there, we're in these roles of being of service to the people counting on us. But the relational aliveness, you know, that happens in those settings, and that right brain to right brain energy always allows me to come to know a part of me a little bit better. And sometimes that's overwhelming part of our jobs, but there are many times where I get through a tough week, and even though it might have been full of pain, or where it might have had, you know, a lot of intensity in hearing other people's traumas, I'm also getting the benefit of sharing in their resilience, which is helping me to come to know both those shadow and strong parts, you know, that are dancing within me. So I can't imagine, I was talking to a friend about this the other day, I can't imagine who I would be as a person if I hadn't been doing this job for the last 23, 24 years, however long I've been doing it.
You'd be just the same, only you'd have different flavors to you.
I would be like robbing convenience stores.
Yeah, for books and pens, because run out. As you're talking, you remind me when you talk, because your talk is very poetic as well, which I love. You remind me of Almas. He when he speaks of the self, the capital S, you know, the person that we are, he uses the term the essence. And that's what I feel when you're speaking. You're speaking about just getting down to that essence of, you know, seeing that part of your client, and then that limbic to limbic relationship, you know, then you can see that or feel that essence of you as well. And that's and that's a real privilege of what we do and how we do it. Now, I'm curious, so bear with me. There are two streams of sand therapy. For example, we've got the Sandtray, which is the Kaufian Sandtray, which is based on the Jungian psychology. And then we have the world technique, which is Dr. Margaret Lowenfeld's, the original, which is very much based on the first wave theoretical guidelines. And then that became Sandtray. So we have Sandtray, and Sandtray therapy then, and please interject because I'm probably missing something. And then Sandtray therapy got all these fingers, and you have, for example, art therapists who love the Sandtray, though I think they would probably be more Sandplay oriented, with that more Jungian based perspective on the symbolic method of Sandplay. And then we have more so in America, in the UK, and which is something that I'm trying to replicate here in Australia, is having more Sandtray therapists that are purely doing the Sandtray. And that can be Sandtray is cross theoretical. So we've got, I don't know, Gestalt, what do you call it? Focused, you know, Sandplay, which I use sometimes for coaching. And then you've got play therapy.
Mhm.
Now, I wanted to explore this with you because both of us are trained in play therapy, but you much more so than me. And when I did my training, I have to be honest, I was horrified when I saw how they were using the sand. And I must say right here, right now, I mean no disrespect to play therapists because they do an amazing, amazing, amazing job. It was just how the sand is taught to them, it's very, very directive. It feels like the therapist is in the tray with the child. It feels really authoritative and constant chatter. You're doing this, you're doing that. And it's very verbal.
Yeah.
And I understand the therapist is following the child, but that constant talk, in fact, for me, it feels like the shadow version of the more Jungian or Kaufian sand play, which is space, nonverbal. So I was really curious to hear your thoughts on that. And like I said, no disrespect to play therapists, because I think, we only know what we know.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's your thoughts, Marshall?
Yeah, and I definitely agree that there's a differentiation between the Sandtray being a toy in a playroom versus being a part of its own modality of Sandtray therapy. And so I was trained up in the tradition of Sandtray, not sand play, and did come from a play therapy background. And early in my career, my jobs were far more child focused. As my career went on, I actually probably worked more with teenagers and adults in the second half of my career than I have children. But even back when my job was more with younger children, in my mind, there was always a marker from, are we going into the playroom? And there is a tray of sand in there that is a toy that would be just like, puppet theater, where we are doing play therapy and role play and reflecting and tracking, like we would with, during art that's being used in the playroom or puppets that are being used in the playroom. But once a child gets to a certain developmental place where they don't need that interactive play anymore, puppets would age up to drama therapy, and art and play would age up to art therapy, and sand and play needs to age up to Sandtray therapy. And I think all of those expressive modalities, they live in a world of being connected to one another, but they have their own separate skill sets that deserve attention. And so I know this about me. I think I'm more of an expressive therapist than anything. I primarily work in Sandtray and in poetry and pottery, clay. And so even though I, still am very much have a tradition coming out of the play world, because the majority of my work has been with clients above an age where play therapy might be the ideal fit. And of course, there are people who have innovated play therapy to make it adult appropriate. And that was just never my world. I tend to live more in the arts. So that's how I hold, those things in balance. I think that once you move out of a play mindset, Sandtray has more moments of stillness. It has more light and shade to the way that the hemispheres and lower brain and upper brain are rhythmically dancing through the session. And of course, in play therapy, there's some of that happening too. But play therapy has this energy, this kind of constant hum of energy, whereas Sandtray feels more like we are on a walk, up the hill, down the hill, making pauses as we go. I like quiet. I like still. So I think I have always been a little bit more drawn to the arts approaches in therapy, because I feel more connected to people when there are moments of shared quiet. That's where I feel like I'm better at attuning.
Mm. I think once you have attuned to that stillness, you can't beat it. It's priceless. Yeah, I mean, you can't describe it, can you? It's just this amazing experience. Two people, two souls together in a room in silence.
It's scary to some clients, but even that, I'm not a clinician who believes that clients need me to rescue them. And so I'll be there if they're looking to me to show up. I want to show up in that way, but I also want to discern, are they saying in the quiet, I've been hurt? And so I'm needing you to prove to me that you're not going to be a part of that hurt. And so in those moments, I feel like I can show up a little bit more. But if it's a client that's just not yet learned to tolerate it, then, I think we need to be okay being uncomfortable together in the sand process. And sometimes that's one of my worries about some expressive therapists and sand therapists is they're constantly thinking it's their job to end dysregulation. And that's not our job. Our job is to make space for dysregulation and to offer our own regulation, but not to insist that some clients live in worlds, and they're going into schools and homes where they need that dysregulation to stay safe. And it's not mine to take that away. So I'm not going to try and use my sand sessions to insist someone have a certain energy. I'm just wanting them to know that it's welcome, and we can be together in whatever form they need it to be. And that's the art. That's the art of it. You have to learn the science. You have to learn the rhythms. You have to learn, some of the expectations and rules, so that all the many reasons why we would adapt that process to meet the needs of the individual.
And this is why, in my mind, you cannot learn Sandtray therapy in a weekend workshop.
Yeah.
You cannot learn Sandtray therapy online. You need to experience as the student all that you just spoke about so eloquently. You need to sit in discomfort. You need, in order to understand that that's potentially what you're going to sit with as a therapist with your client.
Yeah.
Beautifully put. I'm just going to sit back and just let you talk. I mean,
it would be such a short interview. I would just wander off at some point.
No, nobody tunes in to listen to me, so please don't. Oh dear. Yeah, it's I always find, because we do in our training, we've got the level 8, which is quite a high level of training, and we've put all the yucky I shouldn't really say this, all the yucky theory online, and all the readings are online, but the gem is those 5 days when the students come together in the room and they do their process. And as a fellow trainer, I understand that, you get that you are that projection. They're hating on you. They're like, why am I here? Why are you making me do that? Why? So the first couple of days, I'm usually really exhausted. But at the end of the 5 days, when they come to you, or 1 or 2 might come to you and just go, that was horrible. I hated you, but thank you. It's like, oh, that's fine. It's red wine.
It really is a funny thing, to be a therapist. In most traditions, this is something, I could definitely get in the weeds on, because I know it's not a super popular opinion, but I know most traditions have taught therapists not to share much of themselves and monitor self-disclosure and be very careful. And I'm a big believer in appropriateness, and all of our moments and sessions need to be for the benefit of the client. but we've trained therapists to be afraid of vulnerability. Like we've taught them that they're going to do something automatically wrong by being inherently human. And you can't practice something like Sandtray without being vulnerable as a therapist. It requires you to show up with this authenticity. You can't have an agenda. You don't know where it's going to go. It has to just unfold into its own time. And that requires, even if you're not telling stories about yourself, you're letting your own energy, sit in a way that could be rejected or misunderstood. And we're volunteering to work with that and to let people respond to that. So I think we've done a disservice in general in how we talk about some of these topics in mental health training, but also we've kind of set up our expressive therapists to not really understand what vulnerability needs to feel like in an appropriate sense. And so when they come into these trainings that are more expressive and we're saying, no, you have to do your own work in order to responsibly do this, it's confusing to people.
Absolutely, and that's where the more Jungian-based model, the Sandtray, where you have to do your personal process, that really is a really good model, and it's something that we try and replicate when we train our Australian students, which is hard because there's not a lot of well-trained Sandtray therapists in Australia. So the 2 days of the 5 days sometimes is the students doing their personal process. And yeah, that's a lot of stuff comes out, but
yeah.
I'd rather do it that way because, as you said, it's so important. And as the trainer, I also start the session by saying, I'm not the expert. You all bring into this space your own energy, but your own lived experience. And I do also, I don't say it up front, but I allow myself to be vulnerable. If they want to put me in the tray, I will, so I think that resonates with me, what you say about vulnerability and doing your own process. I myself, at the moment, I have a really amazing Jungian analyst and play therapist that I see. She's my supervisor. And, we really dig deep. And I love that deep dive because it makes me a better therapist and better trainer as well.
Yeah. It's really important. That reminds me of what you asked me at the very beginning and why I'm like doing life a little different this year is I was feeling, for a lot of reasons, I was feeling the need to pause my normal way of working, and I'm still doing a couple of continuing education workshops for contracts I had already signed. But this year I'm not doing client work. I'm not doing consultation. I'm not doing traditional workshops. I'm only offering retreats for healers who want to come and use the arts for their own exploration. And because I needed a little something different. It's not forever, just for now. Needed it for myself. And I was recognizing coming out of what the world has been through in the last few years, and then me having this conviction that therapists don't have enough spaces to do their own exploration and to create community while doing that. So that's what I'm doing here at my place in Austin this year. It's just once or twice a month, have a workshop. Probably half of them are sand-based, and then the other ones, part of them are in the clay, and then others are poetry writing. And then some of them are about confronting internalized ableism and how that's impacted you as a healer. Because I tend to spend a lot of time with therapists who have their own chronic illnesses, similar to me. And so I've just been trying to make a space, just to do this, to be vulnerable together.
So would that be more somatics that you would then integrate, or
Yeah.
that's interesting. Yeah, I love how you say that you're creating community. It's something that as you know, I've been working on that for a long time, and it always strikes me that us therapists don't always stick together, and I don't kind of get that. I think it's because I've come in from a different angle, like from business, and completely different angle. But I think that that healing circle, and using the sand for the healing, and just getting therapists to come in and get it out, just download, get it out, and then maybe understand that there is that essence, that depth that you can go to for yourself. And I always think the deeper that you can go, the deeper that you can take your clients as well. That's definitely something I've experienced, yeah. And create community. I really, really like that. Something that we're striving for in Australia. But like America, it's a big country, so you can't just always jump in the car and go, oh, you can see Marshall, or you can see 6 hours later.
Yeah. And I'm right in the middle of Texas, and so you have to really, really want to get here, because the country's big, but then Texas is enormous, and then I'm in the center, and so it is. There's something, even we're in a really good therapist community in Austin. There's a lot of mental health providers, and a lot of taking care of one another, but it's an isolating profession because we're professional secret keepers, and so there are always little parts of us that are just walled off.
I'm writing all these little notes, all these little gems. Create community, professional secret keepers.
Mm-hmm. It's a funny thing. When we go home at the end of the day, and even though my wife works in software, and sometimes there's some of the things that might be proprietary, it's very, very rare that she couldn't share with me everything that happened in her day. And I can't do the same. I can give broad strokes, but it's just not, it's not the same. If we were out shopping and in the market, a customer of hers came up, she would introduce me right away. If that happens the other way around, can't be the same. And so it's even within our relationship with other colleagues, that bleeds over a little bit, that we just are always having to hold back, pockets of things. And I think our nervous systems experience that as isolating, that we can't let people into all the parts of us that are getting impacted as we do our work. And so we need extra community to combat, the nature of the work. But there's not even like average level community traditionally available in our job, because it's unnecessarily divisive and competitive. There's so much arguing over point of view, and that it's a little baffling. It seems sometimes that we go out of our way to be disconnected from one another.
So you get what I'm saying. It's in your world as well. I find it a little bit alarming. And as a professional secret keeper, I think that's where having a supervisor is, sometimes it can be our lifeline. And brings me to this one. When did you and Linda get together to get that one happening?
I've been very generously gifted with the most amazing mentors. It's
Can you slip a few names, or?
Oh, sure. I don't think they would mind it. Linda is someone I've known for many years. I'll even talk about how we met in a minute. Eliana Gill has been a very generous friend to me over the years. Terry Cotman has become a very generous mentor. Bonnie Badenoch is probably who I get to spend the most time with. So I have this.
I secretly love that lady. I saw her here in Australia, and it was like sitting down having a cup of tea with an old mate.
It is
beautiful. Her energy is just amazing. Yeah.
She's just healing. I mean, it just everything about her and I just, that's a powerhouse council of, therapeutic voices that I've gotten to internalize and carry with me. And I'm so appreciative of it. And Linda has been the one for the longest in my life. When I was just out of graduate school and found my first supervisor, my supervisor had been supervised by Dr. Holmeyer. And so I started getting to know Linda more personally through that connection. And so very early in my career, she was, we did a couple of small presentations together, and she really started teaching me how to shape things for conferences. And then it evolved over time where we're doing more and more of the international work. And so if some years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, on one of our trips to Istanbul to teach, she and I were talking about the end of a day. We were kind of reviewing how the day had gone, and we had spent the previous week doing basic Sandtray work, and then now we were moving into some advanced conversations. And I mentioned to her that also there was, glasses of wine involved in this conversation, which probably allowed me to have this confidence.
Loosen up a bit.
Yeah.
Your inner extrovert.
Absolutely. And I told her, this workshop we're doing, which was all about trauma and attachment, I said, this is really a book yet. I don't think this book has been written in Sand yet. And I said, I think we've written it, like this training is the outline of it. And she said, okay, let's do it. And so I was more just musing out loud, and Linda is so action oriented that, it was organized into a book proposal before I knew it. And then, it was right as the pandemic started, then all of a sudden there was all this time that I had given back to me, so I did get sick early in the pandemic, and so I was out of it for a while. But then when I came back, we just had time, and we wrote, and so it came out of teaching together. It came out of our travels together, and then it was just kind of a natural extension of our shared belief. And even with that, Linda and I, we both come out of Sandtray background, but we're very different, in the way that we work. And so that was fun, part of the fun of getting to have this ongoing dialogue with someone that I have received so much from, and we have so much in common, but at the same time, our points of view do diverge from time to time. And that was part of what we wanted to have in the book was, to say, there are some things that are sacred here, but there's also lots of different ways to do this work. And so how do we not compromise what's sacred and still allow, individual healers to have their own, perspectives. And that was the story of how it was, birthed.
Wonderful. And on that point, I think it makes for a very dynamic training when you've got these two different perspectives. And you don't, like you said, you don't have to agree, but you can just say, well, this is how I see it, and this is how I see it. And it really gets your students thinking, doesn't it? Thinking deeper once again. Yeah.
Which is what we would all want, I think, who are teachers, is we want everyone in that room to understand the tradition, and when I say tradition, I don't even mean just starting with Lowenfeld, because, even before professional therapy existed, there were healers in every culture group across the world.
Oh,
that are
absolutely.
using arts and things like sand, and so we know that this has been a part of multiple communities' ancestry. So we want people to know the history, but at the same time, I want every single person to feel empowered that they may be having an intuition of how to make this modality more accessible to a group of people that the rest of us wouldn't be able to understand as well. And so
Actually,
we need that.
as you're talking, Marshall, look what's behind me. Like I've got, Egypt, I've got, the Islamic world, I've got, fighting swords and snakes, and I've got African, as you're talking, I'm like, oh, we do.
Yes, that one in the tree directly above your head.
It's my green garden snake.
Yes, I saw that right away, and I had to calm myself when we started. Yeah, it's we do get a little arrogant in our field, thinking we invented things.
Yeah,
Like, oh
yeah,
my goodness, if
yeah.
something is healing, it's a
Yes,
guarantee that no one in our lifetime invented it. It has.
absolutely. And this is why when I work with, I always find it a little bit more difficult working with psychologists, getting them to understand the sand, because that seems to be the way it's taught, such a set modality. This is how it is. This is the science. And yet I think, but psychology is, it's that the soul, the depths of the soul. Where's the soul in the science, and because I think very much along the lines of sacred geometry, and I think quantum. I think in quantum terms, I'm not an expert on anything. My scope involves a bit of everything, and then pulling that together is, I think, where the magic is. And I really, I don't know, it's really interesting to have those different souls, whether they're clients or students, and I guess biases, which we all have. I know I have them, and then looking at Sandtray therapy through, what lens am I using it now? Because I can't look through it through an African lens because I'm not African, but I can use the symbols to try and understand where that collective consciousness, I guess, is coming from. And that's what I find fascinating when I have different cultures that come into the training. In fact, I will challenge them with symbols to see it through the lens of their culture, not so much through an Australian lens. And that's I love doing the symbol work. That's really something that I get excited about, which I'm sure you do as well. How do you bring the symbols into the training?
Yeah, I think that there's a responsibility to communicate awareness of especially the symbols that come from specific cultures. Some of our symbols are pretty generic, and they are just meant to have whatever meaning the client is allowing to emerge. But then there are some where clients start feeling like they're channeling, the original cultural importance of certain symbols. So I think we do have a bit of a responsibility for, when we're bringing symbols into our collection, of understanding historically where they come from without ever insisting that that's what someone sees. The other thing that I think we have to be really careful of is, how do we create collections that are really representative and inclusive, but not like venturing into appropriation? And one of the ways that we can do that is by being educated around some of the history of symbology, again, without ever thinking that it's our job to interpret. And so we don't have to insist anything. So just one small thing that's important to me is if I'm buying symbols that are really tied to a very specific people group, I try to only buy from companies owned by that people group. And so even just energetically in the commercial connection of how they're coming into my office, from the very beginning, I'm trying to be a little better steward of putting my money into the community that's trusting me to welcome that symbol into the work. And so I think there are ways that we show stewardship and responsibility and being educated, and then we free it up to be used with whatever openness someone needs it to be.
Yeah, I really like that.
Tough.
You know, as you're speaking, I was thinking about I bought a boomerang when I was up in Katoomba, and I was so delighted. I'm like, yes, yes. I didn't look, did I? And I got home and it was made in Indonesia. And you know, that boomerang has never, ever been used in anyone's sound play. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, 100%, 100%. Actually, these African symbols here behind me, I don't know if you can see them very well. My mother made them. You'd love her. She's insane. You wouldn't love her because she's insane, but she's so insanely creative that she borders on that, you know, that Van Gogh type.
I love that. Are those made out of clay?
Yeah, they're clay.
They're great.
I'll bring it close.
Yeah. Oh, those are great. Those are hand built.
Look at that.
Yeah, those are wonderful.
Isn't that amazing? The detail that's on it. And she's got this thing here. I think it's her own trauma, her own inner child trauma. She's not going to be listening to this, so I can I carry it from her anyway. Oh, I literally carry it from her.
You are. Yeah, you're holding it now.
Oh gosh. Isn't that amazing? We're constantly see that moment. Isn't that it's that wow, that's that awareness thing there, right there.
Oh yeah, you saw that travel through your body when you said that.
I did. And for those listening, that's why we call this magic, because the power of the symbol, like I could, you know, if we weren't live on telly now, or on telly or live on whatever we're doing, I'd probably want to just go and have a good cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There'll be plenty of time, won't there?
Yeah.
It's part of, you know, I know some of people who spend time with me here are going to be getting tired of this part of me pretty soon, but it's part of why I'm on this mission to try and convince sand therapists to embrace more and more poetry because of what just happened with you. When we don't all have to be wordsmiths, but metaphors show up not just in the literal images, but in the language people are using to describe the images. So even just using the phrase carried and then the multiple meanings, you know, that's poetic, that's poetry. And when we have space and we're ready, not just to look at the concrete visual symbols of the figures and the symbols, but we're prepared to hear them in the language as well, it becomes more and more transformative. And there's this kind of swirling energy that's holding all of us in the therapy space when that starts to happen. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. I started doing this activity some years ago, realizing so many of my clients will be processing a world and they'll start using phrases like the pieces just don't fit, or I can't, there's something missing here. There's like a piece of the puzzle is missing, and they're inherently using this puzzle metaphor when they're in a stuck point. And so I started inviting them to have us take a photo and print it right in the moment, and then cutting that world into pieces. Say, let's just turn away from this world you've made and let's look at this puzzle you now have. You know, how do we need to work with this as a puzzle? Do you need to see it apart? Do you want to put it back together? If there's one piece that we want to write a message on the back, and then when we go back into the world, because we've enlarged or amplified that metaphor that their language was welcoming a certain kind of neurobiological need, we then find more dynamic when we return to the literal world in the sand. So poetry is right there, every step of the sand making process.
I'm a closet poetrist.
You're coming out of the closet right now, Fiona. How exciting.
I have at the end of my end of my road, I live in the mountains, and there is just this point where the edge kind of finishes, and I sit on the rocks there, and I verbalize my poetry. It just comes to me. It seems to be some sort of, I don't know, it could be some sort of singing spot. I know it is for the local Indigenous peoples. It was a spot that when you stand on that edge, you can see that part of the mountain and that part of the mountain. So it was a spot where they could communicate. And so when I sit there, I guess I channel that that ancestral ability to verbalize. I also do it 3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I wake up and I'm going, oh, this is a poem. Did I just say about my mother, about that insanity thing?
Well, I mean, I can't wait to read the poem called "And I Carried Her," because I think you just started it.
Oh dear, oh dear. Oh, that's great. And I love how you do that with the symbol work. It sounds like it really kind of really integrates that not just that metaphor, but that moment. And this is where we get into that somatics, I suppose, where you have that really strong felt sense, which you picked up as well. I don't know. I ruptured in that moment. Like I went somewhere else, just holding that symbol, and but even you kind of saw that because you're listening to my words as well, because words are very, very powerful. Yeah. But I love how you do that. Yeah. So on a practical note, how would you do that? So you take a photo and then upload it to the camera, the computer, and then print it, or how, on a practical note, how do you do that?
The camera I have is connected to the Wi-Fi, and so it's as quick as snapping one picture and immediately sending that picture to the printer. So it takes maybe 20 seconds, and so I keep art supplies right beside my Sandtray, and so then it's just an invitation of cut it into as many pieces as you want, and letting them know the more pieces you cut, we may or may not be able to put it all back together, but that's part of the invitation. What is it you need? It was based on, I think it's a Fran Waters art intervention in an art therapy book called Missing Pieces, where she would do that intentionally with, kind of drawing on puzzle templates. And one day I started realizing clients in their language, they're telling you, what kind of metaphor would be an aid in how they're processing. So as another example, they might be saying, something as literal in the sand, like, I just want to cover it all up. And so do we have things that allow that to happen? They can always bury it in the sand, but I started keeping different pieces of fabric that some you can see through and some you can't. And I even have coffee filters, the giant ones that you can write on. And so I just started bringing in lots of materials so that if they start to use language that's indicating that, and then a lot of times they would cover it up and realize that feels worse. I'm like, yeah. So some part of you thought covering it up would help, but now that it's covered up, what do you realize? And so that language is part of how we're getting to relate to the world, not just the symbols that are within the world. In the art world, they talk about there being multiple levels of relationship we're attending to during meaning making. There's the relationship between therapist and client. There's the relationship between client and their creation. And there's the relationship between the different parts in the creation. And we're getting to play with all of those dynamics as we move through. And my guarantee is to all of you who do work in this way, clients are using language that's telling you which of those relationships they're needing to focus on in that moment. And they're usually telling you through how they're expressing it with their body or through the background metaphors in their language. And then once we get, a little bit more conversant and those two ways of communicating all of these possibilities about creative processing and trusting intuition and being innovative in the moment, feel safer.
Mm-hmm. And the way you express that just then, Marshall, which is once again very beautifully put, I hope it resonates to a lot of potential therapists who are thinking, oh, I'm just going to do Sandtray therapy. The extent to where you need to go as a therapist, because it's you're not just feeling your clients, you're not just intuiting, you're listening intently, you're watching, you are fully present. And as an advanced therapist, that's a lot to hold, that's a lot to carry, that's a lot to decipher, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of the beginning therapists, and you would have that as well, they would say things like, I'll never get this.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's shrouded in mystery sometimes. And, the reality is certainty is rarely healing anyone. It's our ability to be tolerant of uncertainty that's allowing us to be healers. So we're never going to know something for sure. We practice a field that's largely unknowable, and so it's, am I okay with that? Can I be at peace in the ambiguous? Can I embrace the uncertain? Those are the qualities of a Sandtray therapist, and it's hard to really understand the impact of that being part of your job description until you're in it every day, and you're like, it's really hard to measure if I'm good at this. I'm not going to get the same kind of confidence that comes from, I wrote a computer program and it worked because I hit enter and it did on the screen what I needed it to do. Our jobs are just a little more mystical than that.
Thus, therefore, it's also a little bit more difficult to sell Sandtray therapy, to get people to understand the power of the Sandtray therapy, and to express how diverse it is, working with diverse clients from age 3 to 300, in all ranges, because it's so, always say it loves everyone, Sandtray therapy. It doesn't care who you are and what you've done. It will embrace you. But that's a really hard sell. You've got a beautiful young soul over there in Austin as well. I interviewed her, who is doing her thesis on Sandtray therapy, and she's writing about adverse childhood experiences and Sandtray therapy. So there's some amazing people doing some great stuff, and I'm so excited. There's yourself and Linda, who I have Linda and Holmeyer and Sweeney. Where is it? Must be in the waiting room. The practical manual, which I always recommend that the students purchase, because it's such a handy little manual.
Yeah.
And excuse me, as my students get a little bit further, some of them have already purchased this clinical supervision book, but as they get further and as we actually start training Sandtray therapists to become clinical supervisors specific for Sandtray therapy, then this book will be very handy. So thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Look, I'm really mindful of the time. I mean, we could speak until Heather turns up, right?
We could, yeah.
I was wondering, on that note, when we talk about Sandtray therapy and what is it and how do you sell it, have you got a elevator pitch?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, yeah.
Can we hear it? Is it poetic? Does it rhyme?
It doesn't rhyme. Definitely doesn't rhyme. I change my pitch a little bit based on, you know, the first thing that's important to me is to sense, is this and the person who's needing to hear are they listening through the ears of a protector or through like a core aspect of who they are? And you know, that shifts a little bit of what they're open to hearing. And so if it's, you know, let's just kind of imagine an adult man who's a little skeptical of therapy already, and they're like, so what is this Sandtray thing? I know I have to talk about it in a way that someone who's maybe a little bit more dismissive in their orientation would be able to hear, versus if I'm talking to a 20-year-old poet who's curious about it, you know, I get to lean into a different way of being. But you know, that with that being said, you know, and with lots of adaptations in general, I say that we all deserve to have space for every aspect of our minds to be understood, but not all parts of us have equal access to verbal expression, and not all parts of us have, you know, confidence in creative endeavors. So Sandtray lives in between these two worlds of, it's not quite a blank canvas. You have some pre-existing symbols you get to work with, and at the same time, it's not requiring you to have fully formed words. It allows you to arrange symbols in a way that will mirror your own inner world and give attention to parts that have often been overlooked. And then over time, you come to see what you need to see through the world you create of these complicated symbols, because any relationship that exists in the world you make is mirroring some relationship that's internalized inside of you. And we find that together in your time.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love this work. It's an honor that we get to do it. And it's important that we, you know, be ready to do it, you know, that we be skilled, and our skills aren't memorizing a series of workbooks. You know, it's internalizing convictions and understanding what safety looks like, and handling such, you know, deeply right brain aspects of saying to someone, I'm providing materials for the most vulnerable parts of you who are going to show up. So I'm going to be ready to meet those parts with safety. And that's why it requires, I think, so much practice that you are speaking to, and why it needs so much consultation and supervision. It's because if we're going to make these materials available, we better be ready to show up for people when they make use of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah. Now, you're going to send me some information about yourself, especially those healing workshops that you're running for therapists.
Sure. Yeah.
And contact details and everything, and I'll pop it underneath this this chat that we've had. I really hate to end it here, but maybe we could do another chat another time about maybe a specific topic or something, or
Sure.
no, we won't go through the clinical book because that might be too deep for now. But yeah, we can pick a topic and you can bring a friend.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love that. And you know, the short way to get in touch with me or to learn is just my website is just my name, marshalllyles.com. I'm not on social media anymore. And so I live kind of quietly, but how to email me is through there, and you know, the work that I'm doing is there. So it's there's only one way to find me, but it's an easy way.
Okay, we'll put all those details up, because I think you'd be mad if you lived in the Austin area and you didn't come and join and help create that community. So look, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. And it's, how long have we known each other now?
Would you say?
How long have we known each other now? Would it be?
I mean, 4 or 5 years?
Must be, because I think the kids are all teenagers when we first met.
Yeah, I think my daughter was just out of high school, so that would have been probably 5 years ago.
Yeah. And we shared some secrets too about our children, didn't we?
Yeah, yes, we did. Yeah.
All right, you beautiful, beautiful soul. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege, and I could listen to you all day. You are a poet.
Oh, thank you, Fiona. Thanks for having me.
All right, sweetheart. Thank you very much. I'm going to hit the stop recording.